I'm Shalina Tobin, aka Posh Nosh Gal, and I'm delighted to be joined by one of the most prolific restaurateurs in the UK today, Des Gunewardena. Des is the co-founder and CEO of the D&D restaurant Empire, one of the largest high-end hospitality groups in Europe. D&D's portfolio now spans almost 40 locations around the world. And to mention a few here in London, you may know Quaglino's, Le Pont de la Tour, Sartoria, and the lovely 14 Hills. Welcome, Des. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. We've actually got 43 restaurants, Shalina.
Oh, wow.
You did your research. You've gone from almost 40 to over. So okay. You're right to say prolific. I like that word, prolific.
Well, I'm glad.
I'm a prolific person. I don't know whether that's a compliment or not. Anyway, I'll take it. Prolific. The prolific Des Gunewardena.
On this one. So, well, Des, to start off with, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room. How is business bearing up in these challenging times?
Well, it's not great, Shalina. I have to say, it's, you know, I can't believe we're closed again. We had the, let me put a positive slant on it, because I don't want to be, we're all complaining, we're all whinging, and quite rightly, but you've heard all that. It's not as bad as the first lockdown. So the first lockdown, when we locked down, it was just really, it was a bit scary actually, because we locked down. We had no idea, we didn't have furlough, we had no idea how we were going to pay the staff. We had no idea how long this thing was going to last. And when we locked down, everyone was really quite scared. Customers were quite scared, and they didn't want to come to the restaurant. So actually, with Boris made his announcement, the day after everybody cancelled, so we closed our restaurants before we were actually ordered to. So that was, and we had to close our restaurants not just in London, but in Paris and New York as well. So that was, you know, it was a bit, oh my God, what am I going to do? I've gone from employing 2,000 people, and I've still got to pay the 2,000 people. 1 minute we had, on the Friday we had 150 million turnover. On the Tuesday we had 0. So that was, you know, challenging. This time round, compared with that, a bit more straightforward. We know there's a furlough scheme, and people aren't scared at the moment. When the reaction to the announcement that we were going to have another lockdown this time round was, oh my God, I better get my restaurant reservation in before the lockdown. So we had this, our business actually doubled for the Monday to Wednesday before we closed, compared with the previous week, the business doubled. So there is a feeling here that there is support for the lockdown. I mean, all us restaurateurs all say there's no COVID in our restaurants, and there really isn't. I mean, all the evidence suggests that there isn't. But I think there's national support for this lockdown, and we've got to go with it. But the feeling, I think, is that we've got to get through this in order to get the infections down, and then we can come out and start to enjoy normal life again. And of course, we now just had the weekend, and the announcement on Monday of the vaccine. So everyone, I think people's feelings have changed a bit now, where we're all looking forward to the vaccine that's going to come sometime soon, we hope, to us.
Yeah, I think it's definitely helped people relax a little bit. But with regards to the restaurants, I mean, you've had to be quite creative with regards to interior layouts, changes in the opening times and the menus in particular as well. Tell us about that evolution.
Well, the social distancing, which everybody was very concerned about, and you know, there was a lot of discussion about getting it down from down from 2 meters to 1 meter and so on. It turned out to be, and all the PPE turned out in reality to be less of an issue than we all thought. We all thought coming into the restaurants with all, you know, with our staff wearing masks and having temperatures checked and so on could be a bit of a turn off. You don't go to restaurants to, you know, you go to restaurants to meet your friends and have a nice time, not to feel as though, oh my God, this is a bit, you know, I've got to keep safe. But I was quite, even from the first weekend when we opened in Bluebird, and I had a bunch of us went for dinner that first on Super Saturday. And after about the initial, it was almost a novelty really of having our temperatures checked and having masks and so on. It didn't really affect our experience. So we had a great time. And I think the feedback we had was it doesn't impact the customer experience so much. Obviously, with social distancing, you can't have as many covers in the restaurant. So you go generally. We ended up losing about one third of our capacity. But in the early period, the issue wasn't really the capacity. It was the fact that in July, when we first opened, we just needed to fill the capacity we did have. August, of course, is very different because we had the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which it was funny because I was on these Zoom calls with these guys who run financial businesses and stuff and property businesses, and they were all saying on these Zoom calls, we keep surveying our staff, and they're all really, really worried about coming to work. They don't want to come to work. They're really scared of going to work. They don't want to come on public transport. Everyone wants to work from home. As soon as they all got a tenner off their meal from Rishi, they were out there. They're hordes of them everywhere. So it was a bit different. But overall, look, of course it's had an impact. It's been expensive for us. It's reduced our revenues. Costs have gone up, and we have been helped a bit by the government, obviously, with the VAT being reduced, but it's been and business rates being cancelled. But it's been a real financial struggle. So we have put more money into the company, as everybody else, I think, did. So it's a case of really getting through this year in the best shape that we can, and emerging into the post-COVID world that we're all dreaming of in as good a shape as we can be.
And do you feel, are any of your restaurants at threat of closure?
Are they in threat of closure? We actually opened, apart from Blueprint Cafe, which we didn't reopen because we're thinking of reconfiguring. It's our smallest restaurant actually, of reconfiguring into something different. We reopened all our other restaurants in the UK. Are they under threat of closure? I hope they're always under the threat of closure if people don't come. The way that I look at it now, I hope that all our restaurants will remain open, and if they've managed to survive having reopened, I hope that when we go into post-COVID, well, they'll do okay. So that's the situation in the UK. In New York, would you believe we haven't yet opened our restaurants there?
Oh my gosh!
So however people complain over here, I can tell you it's way worse over there. Because what happened in New York had a far worse COVID than we did initially. They had more deaths than we did. In lots of cases, they were hit very, very hard, more so than the rest of the US and worse than the UK. So they got, the central Manhattan was just like everyone locked down. And we were only allowed to open, you could open with outdoor spaces earlier, but with indoor spaces, we haven't got any terraces there in our restaurants. We were only allowed to reopen those on the 1st of October with 25% capacity. 25% capacity, and that's still the case now. So we are actually reopening tomorrow, would you believe? Finally, Bluebird in Time Warner, and Queen's Yard, which is our other restaurant in Hudson Yards, will open next week. But we're trying to make it work with 25% capacity because, honestly, we can't take any more just sitting around waiting for things to happen, even if we don't make any profit. I've said to Jamie over there, come on, Jamie, we need to get open. So it's been, and in Paris, Paris was a different story. We were allowed to open in July, but we normally close our restaurant anyway in August. It's in Saint-Germain, all indoor space, and everyone goes on holiday, as you probably know, in Paris. There's nobody in Paris. So we thought, okay, we'll wait till September to reopen. We opened in September. We traded for about 5 weeks. Then they brought in this 10 p.m. curfew. Sorry, 9 p.m. curfew there. Okay. 9 p.m. the French are just about finishing their lunch at going for dinner. So we had no trade. A lot of the top restaurants just closed. So today we're closed everywhere, and we will be open in New York tomorrow. Paris, I don't know when we're going to reopen. So we're still we are at the tail end. I say the tail end, where we can see that the end of this crisis in sight, but we're still very much, you know, in the middle of it.
Yeah, but you can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, if the vaccine, if it's true about this Pfizer vaccine of 90% success, and we can all get hold of it, and it doesn't mean that you have side effects and so on, which I'm sure they'll make sure it's not the case. Yeah, we can see the end. We can see that there is an end. I think by next spring, I'm hoping certainly by next spring, the things will be starting to get back towards normal. And I think that also it's not just that. I think when people get in their heads the fact that it is getting better, that there is an end in sight, that generates a bit more optimism, which makes you want to go out. But there has been, to be fair, even after Eat Out, Help Out in August, we have been much busier. In September, we were reasonably busy throughout. It's only when we had those regulations, the 10 p.m. curfew, and then the single household rule, which really took a lot of our revenue. So I think there is a sort of wish to go out already, and I think that will be strengthened by the prospect of the vaccine being around the corner.
And I mean, you have adapted quite a bit as well. I mean, some of your restaurants have started delivering food. Are you thinking about permanent home deliveries even when things do return to normal? And is that a side of the business that you feel you maybe want to expand?
To be honest, I think we've been a bit slow off the mark on food delivery. We're just getting our act together. We've never, you know, we're not natural restaurateurs to do delivery. I mean, you want to talk about Quaglinos. I mean, what is Quaglino? Somebody said, well, what we can do is we can deliver the Quaglinos food with a playlist. So you can imagine you're in Quaglinos. It's not the same thing. But I'm actually involved with another business as a non-exec, and I'm an investor in a business called Franca Manca, which is pizzas. And that business, I mean, they do huge delivery, and it is, I can see looking at their business, what a massive part in casual dining delivery has become and will continue to be post-lockdown. And what actually happened there was delivery was about 20% of our business in Franca Manca. And we went into lockdown, we were doing 60-70%. And there were some restaurants in residential areas, like the one in Balham was doing about twice as much business as a delivery as it was as a sit-down restaurant.
Wow.
So when we reopened, we found that the delivery still remained quite a big part of that business. So the answer to your question, in fact, this week is quite a big week because we're launching a number of our restaurants properly on supper and Deliveroo to deliver, and we're doing these home dining kits where you can order them and then they arrive and you do some final touches. You can have a wonderful dinner. Francesco has actually done who we've interviewed, has done a couple from Radici and Sartoria. So I think the answer to your question, I think at the top end less so, but even at the top end, I think there's more appetite for delivered food than there was before. At the casual dining end, it's a huge business, and you need to be in it in the new world.
Are you thinking about like outside dining spaces for future projects, creating sort of like an outside dining culture, like they have in Stockholm or in Copenhagen?
Both of the cities where we've actually operated restaurants. So the answer is, I mean, we've always been keen on outdoor terraces, and so in fact, I always look at the outdoor terraces they're a really, really important part of keeping restaurants busy in the summer, because in the summer people want to go on the outdoor terraces. Actually, in Copenhagen, as soon as the sun comes out, even if it's freezing cold, they're all out on the on the outdoor terraces. Yeah. And yes, during COVID, and particularly in when we got the single household ruling saying that you could have multiple households outside but not inside, we saw this huge swing to all our restaurants, even bigger than before, the outdoor terraces. So we had when they made that announcement, Quaglinos and 100 Wardour Street, their revenues halved, and Coq d'Argent in the city's revenues doubled. So people were so desperate to go out
Yeah.
They just said, look, you know what? I don't mind, even if it's cold. Actually, you've got some good, reasonable heating in Côte d'Argent. But I saw people. I mean, I was going past just pubs and bars and so on. I've seen all these people in their coats all outside, packed.
Yeah.
So I hope that, and it's always been an important part of our restaurants. Not all of them have outdoor terraces, but many do. So I think that probably in the future they'll become even more important, just so that when COVID returns or another version of it, we're ready with these massive terraces to.
Yeah, well, we have Le Pont de la Tour, which is just down the road from us, and we were there quite a lot, actually. And, you know, you've got such a brilliant heating system in place that we were actually taking our coats off, and, you know, I had worn, like, my jumper was too thick. It was actually brilliant. It was really enjoyable.
No, Pont de la Tour is great. I think at this time of year. Now, I was there, you know, a couple of times actually in the last month, and it's done very well. It's one of the restaurants done well in the last month post the new government restrictions, which killed indoor dining really. But no, and then all the others on the wharf. We've got Butler's Wharf Chop House as well, and Cantina there.
Yes.
So they've sort of come into their own a bit during COVID. They're probably hoping that COVID doesn't go away.
Oh, don't say that.
No, it's not quite like that. No, I think we'll still more business without COVID. But no, it's been a real, you know, saver for them having those terraces.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say that due to the current situation, it's become a buyer's market for commercial real estate?
The short answer is yes, it certainly has. I mean, it was a bit of a buyer's. I think it was a bit of a buyer's market anyway, pre-COVID. Certainly for the end of the market that we're in, and because what we do in the main is we go into interesting buildings, like you're in your rectory, probably looking at it. I'm looking at it, thinking, yeah, that would make a beautiful restaurant. If you ever tire, if you want to move, just give me a call first, because we might stay in. Or that lovely white paved garden of yours. So because what we do is we go into interesting buildings, interesting locations, and build restaurants, and design is a big part of what we do. And there are tons of projects in not just in London, but a lot in the US. We're getting a lot of approaches in the US after we opened our 2 restaurants there in last year. And so we've been inundated with stuff. And since COVID, particularly as people are sitting there, not during lockdown, not doing nothing else, so they're trying to, you know, come up with property deals and so on. Yeah. We have just had a flood of stuff. So we will, post-COVID, we've got a nice pipeline of interesting projects but we actually opened a restaurant during COVID. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that. Which one was that?
So we opened a restaurant called Gloucester House in Bristol.
Okay.
And we took an old Quaker house. It's an old Quaker meeting house, dates back to the 18th century, in Quaker Friars, which is adjacent to a shopping area called Cabot Circus. And it's an amazing building, and it's like a mini version of the German Gymnasium in terms of the look of it. And so we opened a restaurant there, bang in the middle of COVID. And well, not amazingly, it's been really, really packed. And I say not amazingly because sometimes when you're going through times like this, and it's all about you've got it's all, you're watching the news, it's all COVID, it's all about the cases, and it's all miserable, and restaurants, and, oh, are they open? What are they? Then somebody says, oh, there's a new restaurant that's open. Everyone's like, oh, a new restaurant? Those must be pretty stupid to open a restaurant like that. We must go have a look. No, there is a curiosity, and it's actually a little bit of light, a bit of optimism in a very dreary world. I mean, let's face it, it's pretty dreary. Lockdown for me, and having tasted a bit of not being locked down, I mean, it imposes this routine on you, which is you get up in the morning, you do your Zoom calls and your other calls, and then we go for walks, which is very nice by Wimbledon Common. Then you have your, have your lunch, and then you have more calls, and then have your supper, you watch TV. I'm watching this great thing on Netflix.
What's it called?
Queen's Gambit. You should watch it.
Okay.
I'm a great chess player. I love chess. I used to play a lot, and I play online, and it's a great thing that my wife Liz and I are watching on Netflix called the Queen's Gambit. So we watch that, and then we go to bed. I read a bit before going to sleep, and we do the same thing again. And you know what you during the summer we got sort of used to it, and it was lovely. It was sunny, nice walks and cycle rides, and then we experienced real life, and then go back to this. I think some people love it, but it's just like you're just a half a life. You don't have that interaction with. You get on the tube and you see somebody, you see a whole load of people, you meet friends, and I mean it's just this. Thankfully, hopefully, it's only going to be a month. I think much more of this is not great.
Yeah, it's not. But like you said, it was nice. It was nice to have a routine, and you know, you kind of like bedtime is early, and you get up earlier in the morning, and you're kind of like less tired. And I think it's quite nice just to reset and refresh. You've got so many properties, and you've got a huge collection of restaurants, including a hotel. How do you find the properties?
How we find them?
Yeah.
Actually, they're normally all brought to us. So that almost every single property has been that I've ever and I've done acquired the property right back from. I think I was just thinking that every single restaurant, apart from Pont Le Tour, which I didn't find, but that before I was Terence and I opened it together, but he'd already got the property, and Paglino's he'd already signed that property. Every other one I've done the property deals, got to see the site first, and so on. They've almost all of them just come to us. So every week there'll be loads and loads of people saying, "Hey, do you want to take this for mainly restaurants, occasionally hotels, but hotels are big investments, so they don't come around very often. Would you like to take?" I mean, even today, I made a proposal on a couple of, or looked at a couple of sites, and one of them we are going to make we have made a proposal on. So there's all the agents know. They know what the type of buildings we go for, the type of interiors we go for. So interesting buildings, interesting views, rooftops. We've got lots of rooftop restaurants, and so we're like known as being big on rooftops.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they tend to come to us. So I always in 15 years ago. We used to have other people a couple of other guys who went and saw the sites first, but now I always personally go and see the site first. Ever since we had one, we rejected what turned out to be a fabulous site. The guy who was looking at it at the time, who was working on property for us, said, "Oh no, it's too difficult. Oh, Des will hate it. They won't like it." And then the agent said, "Oh, Des, very surprised that you rejected." It was the Royal Exchange where we opened some cafes at the Royal Exchange.
Yeah.
I said, "Whoa, really? I didn't know anything about it." And then, of course, we went back and opened these lovely cafes in the Royal Exchange. So yeah, so yeah, I spent a lot of time.
They got in touch with you directly.
Sorry?
Thank God they got in touch with you directly.
I know. Imagine all those others that they didn't.
But I think, that's important about the relationships that you actually build in the industry, right? So these people clearly know you well enough to say, well, actually, something's not right here. I think Des would love this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they also know we're not to bother with wasting our time, because you don't want to be looking at 100 properties every week.
Of course, yeah.
And we're not like a business that we don't open 20 restaurants a year or anything like that. We go for very regular German Gymnasium, 14 Hills, Closter House in Bristol. They were all sites that people say, yeah, I think D&D would go for this. 14 Hills, because have you been to 14 Hills?
I have. We absolutely love it.
Okay, good.
We took the kids there.
Okay, so that was because of the incredible view and the garden upstairs, which we can't use at the moment. We'll be able to eventually. So people knew when they approached us that we'd love it. And we're looking at a couple of sites a bit like that at the moment. So yeah, it's a big part. It's a big part of our business. But we do, you know, in general, we do 2 or 3 a year. You know, no more than that. We're not churning out restaurants. But mind you, 2 or 3 a year probably sounds like quite a lot.
It does, yeah.
Most people's standards.
And so, I mean, talk to me about the thought process when you're actually starting, when you're buying a restaurant. Do you have a concept in mind and then you look for the right property, or do you do it the other way? Do you do it the other way around? So you go.
We do the other way.
Okay.
We do it the other way around, and the property comes along and we say, I'll give you a good example. Okay, German gymnasium. So we were offered that property. We were approached, and we were in a competitive situation, but we knew that they wanted us to do it. So we went in. We have absolutely no. I mean, who would ever think that they would want to open a German restaurant, for God's sake? So we certainly weren't out there saying, right, where can we find for our new German restaurant concept? No, we saw this building, and it was amazing. It was an amazing building. It was an old gymnasium, and we looked at it, and then we found out about the history of it. It was originally built for the German Gymnastic Society in 1860. And in 1860, it may surprise you to know that the Brits were not into keeping fit. They didn't go to gym. Okay. The Germans wanted to keep fit. There weren't any gymnasiums, so they built one. And it was the first one. And it was actually used for fencing and some other sports in the first national Olympic Games. So we went and saw this building, and David by the other D&D in D&D, David Lowe, we looked at it and said, right, what should we do? And it was, it's a German history. Yeah, well, yeah, maybe we can do German food, because it was part of the history of the building. So we did an interview, a real interview, not like this, a proper interview. In the German,
this is a real interview.
With the Telegraph, okay? And the Telegraph journalist said, okay, so it's an amazing building. What's it going to be? What are you going to do? What's it going to be called? We said it's going to be called the German Gymnasium. He said, gymnasium? I said, yes, but it's a restaurant. I said, yes, but the history of it was a gymnasium, so we're going to call it the German Gymnasium. So, well, how are people going to know that it's a restaurant if you call it a gymnasium? They won't know it's a restaurant. He says, well, no, you know what? We think they'll figure it out. And then he said, German, but do you think German gymnasium? You know, the Brits aren't known for loving, apart from cars, they're not really known for loving things that are German, particularly when it comes to food. So why don't you just call it the gymnasium? So, well, you know, it's a history. It's actually called the German Gymnasium. It was built for the German Gymnastic Society. So we're going to call it the German Gymnasium. He said, so you're going to open a restaurant, you can call it the gymnasium, and you're going to add the word German to it, which isn't maybe not what people really would, not something that would make them want to go there. And then what sort of food are you going to serve? And we said, we were thinking of serving German food. He said, well, you're going to serve German food? But British people don't like German food. I mean, where are there successful German restaurants? Well, so we don't really know. But you know what? We don't need everybody in London to like German food. We just need enough people to fill this restaurant. That's all. Yeah. And he went away, I'm sure, thinking that we were completely ridiculous, and that there was no way this thing would ever be successful, because it's so big as well. But happily for us, it was all right. We sort of worked out okay. People did come, thank God, because if it hadn't, he would have been right. We were idiots. Yeah. And we'd have had to close it very quickly, because it's a very large restaurant. But no, it's turned out to be one of our most successful restaurants.
Brilliant. That is so brilliant. So, I mean, your restaurants, I mean, clearly they have so much character. So that's obviously the history part of it coming in. They have great food, and, you know, but in terms of interior space, they're all so different from one another. So do you base the interior space on the type of people that live in the area, or is it the type of clientele that you hope to attract?
We never think like, to be honest, we never think like that. All we do is we think of okay, how do we bring it to life, and how do we you know, how do we create an amazing space that people are going to want to visit? I'm not a great, we're all, ever since my, you know, days working with Terence Conrad, we're not really believers in, well, certain types of people like certain interiors, certain other people like other. We think if you create beautiful places, you know, everybody, you know, it doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah.
People will come. So we never think, and it's actually quite an important point, that because when we go into cities like Manchester and Bristol, we never ever say, right, we're going to Manchester and Bristol, it's the cities are not as big as London, the spend's not so high, so we're going to do a cheaper product. We don't. What we do, if you go to 20 stories in Manchester, which I think arguably, German Gym's obviously up there, and Queen's Yard in New York is up there, and 14 Hills, but arguably 20 stories is the most beautiful. Because you've got what lovely terrace with the fire pits and the trees and so on, and amazing views of Manchester at night. Arguably, certainly up there is one of our most beautiful restaurants. We went and we did the thing properly. We had a New York designer, we created a fabulous looking restaurant. So we tend to just, in terms of design, I mean, the food is slightly different. In terms of design, we say, look, here's a building, how do we create a wonderful space out of it? And we don't think, well, this is in Stratford, which is our big project coming up. It's got to be slightly different from if it was in Mayfair. I mean, there are clearly things we do slightly differently. So in Stratford, it won't have the same level of luxe as Quaglino's, because we've actually, in Quaglino's, because of what it is, what the concept we wanted to create, it needed to be very luxe. So the concept we'll create in Stratford is a slightly different concept. So the concept will determine the level of luxe. But apart from that, we don't think, we don't try and tailor the design to where a restaurant is from. But we work with the history of the building. When it comes to the food, you know, comes, again, what happens with the food is the food will come with, initially from the history of the building, and then a conversation that develops when we have the chef. So we had a situation in Copenhagen, actually, where we started off thinking that we were going to have we took an old custom house and turned it into a series of restaurants. And we had a Japanese restaurant, and we were going to have a French restaurant, but then we found this great chef, who's an Italian chef. So during our conversation, we decided to change that French restaurant into an Italian restaurant, because he was a great Italian chef. So we will go with the chef. So Francesco, we've got a partnership with Francesco. Clearly, we're not going to be doing lots of British restaurants with Francesco. He'd probably love to do a British restaurant, but we're not. So we do. It's a very collaborative process and a very iterative process after we've got the building. We start off with the building. We don't start off with the food. We start off with the building, and we layer on what we want to do. And then the service, again, service, we do have a little bit more, there's a style that we have. And wherever you are, you can sort of see a little bit the style of service that you get from D&D. You have it's very professional. We are not young, cool kids from Shoreditch who are, with their t-shirts and jeans. That's not us. We're all sommeliers, and Sam, who runs German Gym, is ex-Lausanne. JB, who's one of our ex-Lausanne. So we're all professional restaurateurs, sommeliers and foodies. So, and it's a professional level of service you get wherever you are. We're not suddenly going to turn into something different if we go into different parts of the UK or parts of the world. But I think that the biggest single takeaway from who we are and what we create is that we genuinely do create restaurants which are very different in personality, and actually also very different in look. There will be things that people will recognize, maybe, yes, I've seen that's a D&D, or people used to say that with Conran. But I think we're more diverse than we were in our Conran days. And actually, what I quite like is what's sort of happening in 20 Stories and what's sort of happening in Alcazar in Paris. Initially, when everyone knows, it's these guys from London and New York, there's big swanky restaurateurs opening. And then after a while, they forget that. So they forget who's behind it. So Alcazar, if you ask people in Paris, who owns Alcazar, nobody have any idea. They all think they think it's Michel Beaumont, who's the general manager there, who's been the face of the restaurant. He probably owns it. The same in 20 Stories. I'm sure they've all forgotten now that we're from London. 20 Stories has got its own personality. It's a Manchester restaurant. Queen's Yard, we hope. I mean, in New York, but eventually we just thought of as a New York restaurant. So we're trying to create personalities of restaurants which are independent and feel very independent and different from, from each other.
And the design process, is that, I mean, do you use different design companies or do you have it all in-house?
No, we use different design companies. And that's important because you then get a different take, you get different ideas. And we don't want all the restaurants to look the same. In our Conran days, that was different because we used our own in-house design. And there was a little bit of a tendency that oh yes, we suddenly start recognizing the chairs from another restaurant. So we don't want that. We want the design to be, really, really bespoke. So we work with, I think the last few projects we've worked with very, very different designers on each one of them. German Gymnasium was actually with Conrad. It was a very long project. We were talking about how long it took to do your rectory. That took about a long time. So Conrad were involved in that. So they were, but we worked with Russell Sage when we did the new Paglinos. Mm-hmm. We worked with Nancy Ruddy, a New York architect. She's more an architect than a designer, super talented, very difficult to work with. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying, but a great, very good creative and collaborative process and producing great design. So she did 20 Stories with us. We're working with Robert Angel, who did 14 Hills. And if you look at Robert Angel's work, none of his work looks anything like 14 Hills. And design is not the way that we work with designers is we don't simply say, hey, we've got a great space, go away and come up with 3 different concepts and we'll choose which one. It's a much more interactive process. We're and I'm very personally involved in that design, so that we get we tend to sort of, for Robert 14 Hills, we said, okay, Rob, what we want to do is we want to create this, it's got to be a garden, but it's got to be a sort of forested garden in the sky. Okay, now work with that concept and then let's just come up and then we'll work on the detailing. So we do have we do work, we start off with an overall concept which then develops, sometimes changes. So in Queen's Yard in New York, we said, okay, it's got to be a Brit's home in New York. Okay, that is the overall concept for this restaurant. We don't want it to look like a home, but that's the inspiration behind it. So we had the bar area, and we had the kitchen where all the dining took place, and we had the living area overlooking the Hudson River and overlooking the vessel with lovely art. And Nancy did a brilliant job from that overall, very loose concept.
And is it you that actually comes up with the initial idea? I mean, how involved are you personally from the concept stage to the interior design stage?
I think that is, I'm very, very involved in that. I mean, David and I work closely. David, it's not like me going off and saying, hey, I've got this idea, right, let's get on with it. We have a, very, dialogue about what do you think? Do you think this will work? But that's a big part of my job is in the company, my role in the company is to come up with what are we doing? Where are we going? Shall we take this building or not? And what's the overall concept we're trying to create? But in doing that, we're working, there's Duncan as well, who's done our development, and it's a process of, we have a conversation about it, and then we emerge with sometimes the same concept we started with, sometimes with a very, very different concept. And the first concept that we had for the 14 Hills would have been a complete disaster, I think. We were going to do this fish restaurant, and the first, and I saw the first design of it. It looked like Gatwick Airport, and they said, listen, we can't do this. It's wrong. I think doing fish up here and trying to get that feeling of fish doesn't work. So let's go for something. Let's go for something different. We actually won this. We won awards we won the best design in the world for 2015 from the restaurant designers worldwide for German Gymnasium, and we have won the best standalone restaurant from those same guys for 14 Hills. So both 14 Hills and German Gym got won these big awards. One of the awards we won, and actually I did a little Instagram interview like this with Rob Angel, was for biophilia. I've never even knew what do you know what biophilia is?
No.
It's there you are. I don't feel so guilty about being so ignorant. Rob said, I want to do an Instagram talk with you on biophilia. What's biophilia? But it's a big rage among designers. It's about integrating the landscape and plants and trees into your environment, into an interior environment.
Okay.
So we won the award for the world's best biophilic restaurant.
Very good. You didn't even know it.
You
did it and you didn't even know it.
I know what a tree looks like, but I never heard biophilia sound a bit like something you didn't really want to get.
What do you think of putting plants into an interior space? Why can't they just keep it simple?
I know, I agree. It's a bit like HR as human resources. I just think, why not people or even personnel? But people come up with these things, and biophilia seems like I'd definitely get rid of that as a phrase.
It sounds scientific.
Sorry?
It sounds more scientific.
It does, yeah. And it's not about science, it's all about feeling and making people feel good. I mean, the other, somebody said we worked with another great designer, David Almada, on when we did Sartoria, when we did the new Sartoria with Francesco. Mm-hmm. And he said something to me which was very important. He said, well, about an interior, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking it's all about looking good. And it is, part of looking good, but ultimately the most important thing is to make people feel good. And that is a very, very important aspect of how we design places, because sometimes you concentrate on making things look good. You go in and say, wow, that looks good, but somehow it doesn't quite work.
In terms of functionality as well.
In terms of functionality, but also how you feel in a room. When your customers go in, sometimes people say, well, I don't know what it is, instinctively I feel good. Or I don't know what it is, but instinctively I feel bad here. It doesn't really work. So that's
well,
I've seen restaurants.
I think you can feel that in your restaurants because, I think you're talking about, this little bit of a consistent theme going through all of them. And there's, color, there's a very kind of quirky vibe, which is in itself, it's kind of uplifting.
I'm glad to hear it. I like that quirky vibe because I think having a bit of charm and it doesn't just mean, I'm not just talking about visual, but it's also in how you communicate with people. Having a little bit of charm and authenticity, I think, is a very important part of our culture. When I sometimes read stuff and it looks as though it's been churned up by corporate PR, it makes me because I think it's all about people relate much more to individuals and individuality, charm, authenticity, all those things. And being genuine, It's also sometimes easy just to say, oh, let's go for those. You get the buzzwords, the artisanal, farm to table, and everyone says, oh yes, I'm doing an artisanal cheese trolley, and it is important to try and not, just be genuinely what you are, rather than trying to hook yourself onto the latest new buzzword.
Yeah, like biophilia.
I don't think that's going to be a buzzword that I'm going to be.
No buzzword.
I'm going to be asked to do lectures on biophilia. Very, very few people. How many other restaurateurs or chefs have you interviewed who have been championed for their biophilia?
None. None.
I am unique.
So we are digressing massively, I wanted to actually talk to you about a little bit more about your past, actually. I know you started off as an accountant, and you actually started in restaurants when you worked with Terence, and you worked with him for 12 years, and you guys were a massively successful pair. And I know that this was quite some time ago now, in 2006, when you guys parted ways. But how did you guys both decide to change the working relationship? What was the reason for that?
He's a bit older than I was.
Okay.
He said to me, honestly, every time I turn my back, a few new restaurants pop up all over the world. Oh, Des, I mean, honestly, why do we need to be opening all these restaurants all over? I remember going around we used to go, he and I, and actually David and I do this as well. Every Christmas we go around with big sort of magnums of champagne and wish everyone a happy Christmas. And we were doing this trip, and we finished up at the Great Eastern Hotel, which we own, now the Andaz. And we'd gone around about 20 restaurants. She said, wouldn't it be so much better if we just owned a couple of these big hotels? I mean, that was worth a lot of money, the Great Eastern. We sold it for 150 million. We were 50% owners. He said, well, if we just owned 100% of this, it's having all these little restaurants all over. And there was some in Tokyo and Paris, and we were in New York. I mean, honestly, so much of a headache. So he had not chaired a restaurant board for a number of years when we did the buyout, before the buyout. He was much more involved in the design company and in the shop business. Obviously, very involved in the creation of particularly in the early days, of the design of the restaurant. But the restaurant business had evolved, and so the decision for us to part was on the basis that I wanted to expand the business. I thought we had a huge opportunity in restaurants and hotels to build a world-class business at the top end. And he agreed, but felt it wasn't really right for him. And so he said, why don't you get some, go and find some. I had a bit of cash, actually. You sold the Great Eastern Hotel for a lot of money, so I had a bit of that. He said, why don't you borrow some more money and then buy the restaurants? And he remained involved for another few years. Right. As an investor, and then we probably went our own separate ways back in 2012 when he ceased to be an investor. But he and I had a great relationship over that period. I used to say to Liz, my wife, you know, I think I spend more time with Terence Conran, certainly my awake time, than I do with you. We used to see each other every day, and we used to work, long hours.
So it was like a divorce then?
Sorry?
It was a bit like a divorce then?
It was a bit like a divorce. As you may know, we ended up in the courts in the end.
I didn't know that.
I know that. You haven't done your research. Yeah, we had a bit of a spat.
I'm not the Telegraph, see?
We had a spat in the courts about what my shares in his company, the Conran Design Company and shop business, were worth, and so on. But anyway, look, we had over many years a very good relationship. Our parting was probably, or the last bit of it was probably, could have been a bit better, but that's life. But no, we did some, and we got on very well because his area of interest was design, obviously, and I was a finance guy. I'd never actually, although I was an accountant, wasn't really a traditional accountant. So I was a qualified accountant, but I worked on financial strategy. I was more a strategist, a property person, and I worked with another billionaire before I worked with Terence Conran. So I was good at that, the deal making. And so we were great partners, very complementary in terms of what we were interested in, right, and what we were good at. And we had another guy, Joel Kisson, who was a restaurateur operator. So we built a great business together. And although he had money to begin with, we started it off in an apartment. We had a 3-bedroom apartment. He had this very grand living room with river views, overlooking Tower Bridge. I had a back bedroom with wardrobes. And we had a couple of PAs and financial people in another bedroom and another bedroom full of designers. That's how we started the business off. So it was wasn't really a startup, but it was a sort of startup, and we built a great business. But D&D, I think, and people still say, because you remember, Terence Conran and those times, and people still occasionally talk to me about, oh, you're the ex-Conran guys. We're about three or four times as big as we were then. So we built way more as D&D than we did as Conran over the last, it's a long time now, 14 years.
And how has the restaurant scene evolved since you started out in the industry?
Well, I think it was about must have been about 15 years ago. Do you remember there was a president or a prime minister in France, President Jacques Chirac?
Yes.
Do you remember Jacques Chirac? Jacques Chirac came to, it was at the time that we were starting to open our restaurants. We opened a number of restaurants, and people were talking about a more interesting restaurant scene in London. He came to London, he said, the British had the worst food in Europe apart from the Finns. Which was a real insight, because we have one of our best chefs was Helena Prolacco, who was a Finn, who was a terrifically talented chef. Anyway, he said we had the worst food apart from the Finns. Well, I think now, and for a number of years, people would say the food scene, the restaurant scene in the UK, and in London particularly, is as good as anywhere in the world, including New York. And we're in New York, and we have been in Paris, and we had restaurants in Tokyo. I would say London, along with, New York is a really super exciting restaurant scene, but London and New York are way more exciting than most other cities that I know, more exciting than Paris, where we've had a restaurant for many years. But how's it changed apart from the fact that, well, we're way more interested in food than we were when I was a kid. I mean, it used to be that food was what you had before you went to do something else. So TV dinners, way before you were even born, the big thing was TV dinners. You never had food on its own, just had dinner. You were doing something else while you ate your food. And we did have some pretty rubbish restaurants when we first opened. There was like the Gavroche you went to, and there were a few restaurants. Langan's was there then, but it wasn't a great food scene. And what I think has changed massively. I think people in Britain are way more interested in food, way more knowledgeable about food, not just in restaurants, but in terms of supermarkets and so on. They really know more. They can't get enough of watching food on TV. And I think there's been a massive democratization of restaurants, because restaurants were places you went to on a special occasion. You went through at the end of the month because you want to celebrate. You had a hard month working. Let's go for a special dinner at our local Italian restaurant. It's not like that anymore. So my daughter Saskia, she's a real foodie, and she eats out twice, 3 times a week. That's how she socializes. She socializes in restaurants. Our generation went to pubs and wine bars. We never really went to restaurants. Restaurants were special occasions. So I think restaurants have become much more accessible. The food scene, in terms of the creativity, you've interviewed a lot of chefs, the nationality, the food. You've got Peruvians and Turkish, and as well as Italian, French. The food scene in London is amazing, and it's just. I think you just can't compare. There's a food culture here that simply wasn't there 25 years ago, and there's no sign of that declining. It just seems to get, bigger and bigger.
And so, do you feel it's going to be a powerhouse industry as it was pre-COVID once we get back to normal?
I think the industry's been hit big time, but long term, the industry is going to continue to be a big growth industry, because people are not going to stop eating out more when they're able to. There's nothing that makes me think that they are going to. We're going through a very difficult period where we're at the forefront. We're really at the forefront of COVID in terms of the economic impact. The question marks I think I have about how exciting eating out is going to be in 10 years' time compared with now, I think is around how Britain and how we are as a country, we develop in the post-Brexit world. If we become insular and we become less welcoming to people from European countries and from other parts of the world, I think the food culture and quality of restaurants will, without a shadow of a doubt, will suffer. So I think that's an important concern. I think in the short term, there's a shortage of jobs, not a shortage of staff. I think there will be, once we emerge post-COVID, potentially a job shortage at a macro level. At a micro level for us, I've never known a period when everyone's always saying the biggest challenge is getting people, and it remains the case. We found it a little bit easier, obviously a lot easier to get people currently, where we opened a new restaurant, as I said, in Bristol, and we are seen as being a good people to work with, and we're seen as being safe, and we're going to emerge into a situation where there are quite a lot of jobless. I really hope that's going to be a short period of sharp jobless, and that we all get back to similar levels of revenue that we were all enjoying before COVID. But I think there are it's not an absolute given that there'll be further bumps in the road, because we'll have, I think my view is we will have a strong bounce back immediately out when we get the vaccine, we get back to normal. But then the reality of all the debt, the national debt that we've got with Rishi, is going to start hitting home. So there is a high risk of us going into a more difficult year, I think, in 2022 and 2023, with potential risks of recession and so on. And where we sit in the world as a country, post-Brexit is going to be a big determinant, I think, of how the economy as a whole, and in particular restaurants, perform.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next, but obviously very challenging times. So what is the formula, if any, that keeps your restaurant so current?
The formula is that there isn't a formula. That is the most important thing. I always think I'm sitting in my house, I hate being locked down, but I'm in the dining room, actually, in our house. And we've had this house for over 20 years, and we've lived in it. And it's not, the architecture of the house, it was built in 1860, actually, 1850, something like that, hasn't changed. However, the interiors have changed, and we've changed the artwork, and we've moved things around, and it's got a life. And I think, restaurants, physically have got a life, and we have a life. So we've changed, we've changed how we dress, we've changed the food that we eat, how we entertain. We've changed. We're different from the 1990s. And I think it's the same with restaurants. You have to evolve. You can't, we're not some, Quaglinos is certainly not going to reinvent itself as being Pont Latour, but it has changed. I mean, Quaglinos as a restaurant was there before we owned it. In 1929 it opened, and it had the Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret had her table. Here we are, we're now approaching its 100 years. We'll be soon its 100 years, and had its 90th birthday. It has changed. It changed when Terence did his amazing design when we opened Quaglinos in '93, something completely different. And then after we set up D&D, we changed it again to be a slightly different look. And it will evolve, but it will still be, Quaglinos. And so I think, so the short answer to your question is, you just have to have restaurants are not things that you create and then you go away and they work forevermore, hopefully, and you collect the dividends at the end of the year, think, great job, that's very nice. It's a day-to-day thing. It's probably a way more day-to-day business than the other business I know, which is retail, home furnishings retail, which is much more, if you order that sofa and it doesn't serve you, it's there. If you create a menu and people hate a dish, you take it off. So it's a very, very, it's a live, it's a live thing. So how you remain current and try and remain successful is by having a very strong culture of innovation, not just innovation. Innovation is probably not as important as just excellence and care all those things. It's that you need to it's hospitality. It's looking after your customers and making sure the place looks lovely. It's not rocket science, but it is a culture of care. And it's easy to say. I've seen restaurants in the matter of weeks and months go from great restaurants to being very ordinary restaurants when that spirit is gone.
Yeah.
So when sometimes you see more in casual dining, I've seen casual dining restaurant chains sold, new owners come in and they start saying, oh, I'll tell you what, we'll cut the flowers because that's a bit expensive, and we'll have slightly cheaper uniforms and cheaper menus, and customers feel it, and you feel it when you go in immediately. So I think just I think that's what would be my answer. You just have to keep it. It's an everyday thing. You just have to keep current. It's like my hairstyle. I've got to keep my hairstyle current. Well, it's probably thinking it's not current at all. But if everyone looked at me and said, "Oh, everything you're wearing, Des, that was what you were wearing 25 years ago," they think, "Come on, get with it, come on." So and it's a bit like that in restaurants.
So stop spending in some of your restaurants and spend a little bit on yourself, basically. Is that what you're saying?
That's probably what some of my colleagues are saying.
So, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned your guest list at Quaglino's, actually, and you had some pretty amazing guests. You had the Queen visit, Angelina Jolie, David Beckham. Did you meet any of them yourself?
Actually, I did bump into Angelina Jolie as it happened. No, I mean, we've had some, firstly, with Quaglino's. Quaglino's was the very first public restaurant that the Queen went to. And I think the Queen and Prince Philip had their first date in a restaurant at Quaglino. And there was a letter, actually, that was written, I think, by the Queen to Prince Philip, which came up for auction. And a few years ago, and we made a bid for it, but unfortunately, somebody else bought it ahead of us. I thought that would be lovely having Quaglino's. No, but we've had some great stories. Quaglino's, we had Princess Diana used to go to Quaglino's a fair bit, and what she used to do was she used to go in through the front, but then she used to go out through the kitchen so that the paparazzi would hear, "Oh my God, Princess Diana is in Quaglino's." So they'd come down. When Prince Harry came, actually, when we relaunched Quaglino's, Prince Harry came and with a bunch of his friends, a couple of guys and lots of girls, had their dinner in Quags, in the new Quags, and the paparazzi somehow found out that he was there, and so we said to the manager said, "Look, do you want to go around the back because your mother used to go out through the back?" And he said, "Oh no problem. I'll go out the front. I'm very happy with going out the front." But now I've got there's some great stories. In fact, sorry?
Did he get mobbed?
Yeah, I mean, he had pictures all over. He obviously didn't mind that. He didn't mind that. But I've had some great stories of I bumped into Princess Diana. When she was at Pont Le Tour, actually, she was having lunch at Pont Le Tour, and Joel, who was the restaurant, who was around the restaurants at the time, and I was sitting having a quick bite of the grill, and then we saw Princess Diana walk past us. And we were leaving at the same time, and this is absolutely true. We followed her down the road along Chat Thames, and she got into this car. And then she immediately got out again, and then got into the next car because she got into the wrong car.
Oh, that is so funny.
So can you imagine the guy who was the driver in the car going back to his wife in the evening saying, "You wouldn't believe what happened to me today. I had Princess Diana." Don't tell me another one. Yeah, Princess Diana came along and just sat herself in the seat next to me in my car. And then she suddenly saw who I was and jumped out again. So we've had, we don't, it's, to be honest, we don't make a big deal out of it. But it's, we have all sorts of, and we've got loads of great stories. Madonna came she came when we opened Mezzo. We opened for lunch and dinner, and she came in the middle of the afternoon, and she said, "I want to have something to eat." So sorry, we're not open. So she said, "Well, wait," and she sat on the steps of the old Mezzo until we opened. Yeah.
Wow.
I know, we're just like that, you know.
I mean, you didn't even give
We
her like
like
a little
playing hard to
private
get.
room to wait in.
And I mean, I was told that she sat on the steps and waited till we opened. But no, we've got some great. Actually, we should write some stories. Some really, really good fun stories from different, different people who. When we launched Wastavinos, oh my God, we had an amazing, amazing party there. Donald Trump was there.
Wow.
David Bowie. Oh my God, we had like the whole world. All the film stars were there, mainly because we launched it with New York Post. So Rupert Murdoch owned New York Post, and it was the launch of their new Page 6. And so they launched it, Page 6, and the opening of Wastavinos. And the next day, we had the whole of the front page from the New York Post with a picture of everybody partying with Wastavinos, with "What a Party" was the headline.
Wow. So, were you in the picture?
No, you must be joking. We were working. Remember, in the restaurant business, we're not the stars. And it's very important. You know, we're the restaurateurs. We're humble caterers. Okay. We're caterers to the stars, but we are caterers. We are not stars.
Well, I hope at the very least you bought something new to wear, Des.
Yes, I did.
And you got a haircut.
Did I have a special haircut? I didn't have a special haircut, but I bought something very nice too. Wild party.
So a bit of a departure from the restaurant strategy when you acquired the South Place Hotel. I know we're totally jumping off topic. How did that come about? Tell me about how you got into the hotel scene.
We got into the hotel scene long before South Place. And actually, we were much more successful financially as hoteliers than have been as restaurateurs, which might seem a bit of a surprising for me to say. But we actually developed what was the Great Eastern Hotel, which is now the Andaz, and there's some great story. I'm going to tell you a great story about that in a second. So we opened that in 2000, year 2000, and sold it to Hyatt in 2006, the beginning of 2006, and we built that in the late 1990s, and we acquired the building. We were 50% owners with some US guys, and we borrowed £50 million between us, the two of us, and we put in 25 million, so we spent 75 million, and we sold it for 150 million. Oh my God, can you imagine that? So that was like the transformational deal for Conrad's, a private company, and for us as shareholders in that business. It was an amazingly successful boutique designer hotel, which we developed and designed and ran with lots of restaurants. And the funny thing about that hotel was that when we sold it to Hyatt, and I was sitting across the table from this guy Steve Goldman, who was the head of acquisitions for Hyatt, came in from Chicago, big shot. I said, Steve, so what are you going to do with this hotel? I mean, you're spending a lot of money buying it for 150 million. What are you going to do with it? He said, we're going to have it as a Regency. I said, Regency? What's the highest room rate you're achieving in the Regency? And he told me what he was achieving. And I said, that's 20% lower than we're achieving here. So you're going to buy this hotel, you're going to brand it Regency, and your rate's going to go tumbling down. He looked at me and said, oh, well, actually, you might have a point. We can't be a Park Hyatt because Park Hyatt is leisure. It can't be a Grand Hyatt because Grand Hyatt is about conferencing. We have conferencing. So they had to create a new brand. So they created the Andaz brand because they bought our hotel without a brand for it. So no, it was so that's how we got into hotels. And then what happened years afterwards was I was in Santeria having lunch, and this guy whom I knew, property guy called Paul White, who ran a big property fund, Frogmore, came over and said, Des, I've got a problem. I said, oh, what's the problem? He said, I've got this building, it's an office building, and I've got the office market was terrible at that time, 2008, 2009, 2009 it was, office market was down in the dumps. We need to do something with it. Why don't we do a hotel together? Why don't I'll invest, I'll be the investor, you guys can be the operators. We can do a mini version of what you do to the Great Eastern, which is what we did. So so we created, but what was interesting was the Great Eastern was an old building, and we had to, very complicated building, and very large, 267 bedrooms, and the south base was a hole in the ground. So the building that there was before was torn down. So we built that hotel, right, in partnership with Frogmore. We designed every single square meter of that building. Right. So we worked with architects and the interiors, and I love that project because we chose all the artwork. It wasn't like a job lot of artwork for the 80 bedrooms. We chose each and every piece of art. We worked with about, I think we say 100, maybe not quite 100, but we worked with tens and tens of artists from the East End, from Shoreditch and so on, in terms of the artwork, chandeliers and so on. It was a really lovely project, and because we were creating that during David and I and the team. We were creating that during a period of quite tough times, and we didn't have a lot of projects on. So we were able to put a lot of care and detail into that. So that's how we got it. It's not the first time we've been in hotels, it's the second time we've been in hotels, but hotel market at the moment is very tough, as you know.
Yeah, so you're not planning anymore, or do you think there may be on the horizon?
We have actually bid for a few other buildings, but hotels are very, the properties are very expensive, and the market in London, it's very, if you find a hotel which isn't performing very well, the sellers still want to sell it for the value that it would be if it was performing well. So it'd be very difficult to buy. But now, this is not a bad time if you want to acquire properties for hotels, because the values, obviously with COVID, have been depressed. And we are actually working on a project as we speak now in London. So yes, we'd love to have more. But I mean, we're more restaurateurs than hoteliers, and to build a hotel, to the South Place was a £50 million investment, and then so that now would be probably your 60 or 70 million. So you need funding partners and property partners to do it.
And South Place Hotel, while we're on the topic, you've got a Michelin-starred restaurant at the top. You've got a lovely Angler restaurant, which is one of my favorites, actually. So when you were building it, did you actually think, we want to have a Michelin-starred restaurant here, or is it something that just happened?
It actually just happened. And we wanted a fish restaurant, and we wanted it. The sort of design story of the building was that the energy levels moved up the building, so it got lower and more serene as you went up the building. So we have our craziness downstairs in the bar and in what is now the South Place Chop House, and then we want to create something much more serene and lovely, overlooking the bit of a skyline. Not that it's not an amazing view, but the skyline. And we wanted a fish restaurant, and we had Tony Fleming as our chef. Tony is the most humble person, humble chef ever. And I remember we were coming back. I think Dave and I were on a plane coming back from China. I think we'd been to China and Hong Kong. And as we landed, we got this message that we got a star. And David said, "Oh, we've got a star." I said, "We're trying to guess who had got it." Must be Ori, must be Nico. Ori got the star. And I don't think we had Boston Place at the time. So he said, "No, it's Angler." I said, "Angler? Oh, wow, it's fantastic." We weren't, Tony was not trying to get a Michelin star. And actually, I think he was a bit surprised as well, because he got a call, he was taking his kids to school. So I mean, we've never ever chased Michelin stars, as you probably know. We not, it's great to have a star, but it's a nice to have rather than something that we particularly wanted. But no, it's definitely, I mean, clearly has helped the restaurant. It's a beautiful restaurant. Now we have Gary. I don't know if you know Gary, who's Exeter Square.
Yes, I've spoken to him as well. He's great.
Who's fabulous. Who's I think his ambition is to get a second star. I think it's his ambition. Is it my ambition? I don't, sometimes it puts a lot of pressure on. I think when you have a second star, you become obsessed with trying to maintain that second star.
Yeah, very different.
But we look at of course, it's lovely to have a star, but most importantly, is to have a great restaurant up there, and it has been. It's a real calling card for the hotel. I think the other good thing about Michelin stars, being pro Michelin stars, is that it does somehow, to the outside world, amongst people in the industry, people take you more seriously. That you must be more serious. You must be serious about food. You've got a Michelin star. It helps to recruit good quality people.
And so, I mean, to run the kind of business that you do need incredible people. How do you find good management staff?
Well, I mean, it's, that's like the biggest, if I knew the answer to that, I mean,
well, you're doing
we're always
so well.
Great people. I think you find great people by doing great things, and people will either want to work for our type of organization, our type of business, or you don't. So I think it's always our biggest challenge. We have a great, it's not me recruiting all the staff, it's Carol, who's our people director. David is much more involved in recruiting chefs and so on. We're constantly being approached by people all the time. We're big on LinkedIn, and Carol's like a super whatever it is on LinkedIn. But I think you recruit. You attract people by doing great stuff, great things, and if you open great restaurants which are exciting and ambitious, then I think you attract people. You've also got to attract people by actually being a good place to work. And one of the things I've learned over the years is, I think in the early days, we used to think, oh well, it's great, we're having a fabulous time. It must be wonderful for work for us, just because we were having a fabulous time opening great restaurants all over the world. But actually, you've got to make the workplace enjoyable, and that's always a challenge because it's a hard job. It's not an easy job to work in a restaurant. You have to work hard. So you have to make sure that people are paid well, and I think we do have a reputation. People do have to work hard to come and work with D&D. It's a hard, driving, entrepreneurial environment, I think you getting the culture right. Not people who want to work for small little restaurant groups or individual restaurants. Probably a number of them have actually worked for us and then gone and set up their own restaurants. But we're not for everybody. But I think the people who are successful, who are good, really thrive in D&D, because what we do is we throw responsibility at people. So if you're really good, you can go through the ranks very quickly. And we have people who started at barbacks who've ended up as general managers, and we do have people who work with us for Suzanne at the hotel, who came out of the Connaught. So Suzanne and German general manager, and she came from Germany. She worked at the Connaught for a few years. Then she came and worked with Royal Exchange, and she's been at South Place. I was speaking to her, actually, funnily enough, yesterday, and I was looking at her CV because we're pitching to this other hotel project, which I think we're going to get. And I suddenly found that she'd actually been with us for 10 years. I said, Suzanne, 10 years? Did we have a party for you? She said, no, it was in lockdown. So, so we have a lot of people who've been with us for many, people, man and boy. Some of our top guys have been with us for 15 years. We have, obviously in the business, we have very high staff turnover at low levels, but senior levels, less so. I mean, David and I have worked together since 1995. He was the general manager of Mezzo. Can you believe that?
Amazing.
So 25 years.
Well, it's a testament to
your work. Most marriages.
And so, well, let's hope this one doesn't end in divorce, eh? May it last. So, I mean, we're talking about, how to retain staff, how, the things that you do to keep them. I mean, every chef's dream is to run their own restaurant. And so how do you strike the balance between encouraging them to progress and develop themselves, but at the same time, keeping them as long-term members and loyal members of the team? I mean, what kind of incentives do you give?
The biggest incentive, if you like, is our chefs and managers have a lot of freedom in how they run their restaurants. I mean, you can't come in one morning and say, listen, I'm changing my friend. If somebody came in and said, I'm going to change my restaurant from an Italian restaurant into a Turkish restaurant, we'd probably say, no, you can't do that. But in the context of menus, and in the context of of what you do day to day and how you manage, you really are allowed to do what you like. What we're concerned about is making sure the quality is good, and making sure that the reputation of the restaurant is maintained. Make sure that you hit your financial targets. Provided you do that, you can learn a lot about how to run a restaurant business, which is a great platform if you then want to run your own operation, because you're learning a lot of those skills by working for us, because we do let you get on with it.
Yeah.
In the main, get on with it. If you're not doing very well, we don't tend to let you get on with it so much. We tend to be all over you, saying, "Come on, what the hell's going on here?" But if you are doing well, it's a nice environment to.
And do you offer your staff like share options in the company, that kind of thing?
Well, we're a private company, so share options don't really work. Our guys, we have had equity actually for some of our chefs in the restaurants. So Francesco is a partner; he has a partnership with us. Anna Hansen, the Modern Pantry, we had a partnership with her, though we now bought her out. We own that business outright now. But on a regular basis, we're mainly driven by the fact that our managers and chefs get big bonuses. I mean, if they're successful, they're very heavy. They're well bonused and well paid.
And so recently you started Club D&D. What is the thinking behind that? Is it like a better way to understand your clientele?
Actually, we started it a while ago. It's interesting you think we've recently done it. I have to have a word with Ollie. His obviously communication isn't as good as he thinks.
What do I know? My research is terrible.
No, Club D&D we set up a few years ago, and it really was a way of just creating a club within D&D, which was obviously for our most loyal customers, also our friends. And the idea was if you became a regular, you became part of the group, and you were invited. When we had an opening, you'd have your own private. The chef would have a session for the Club D&D members. We've done some fun stuff. Actually, we've done some wine trips to the Waddesdon Manor where the Rothschilds have their wines. Our most memorable one, we did a ski trip to Val d'Isère. We took a bunch of our friends and a few of our regular customers, a few of our friends who are out there every year anyway. And so we do really. We did a party in Ibiza with South Place crowd, which was memorable for different reasons, which I won't go into on this call. But the idea is that of the club is to create, is to encourage people to feel part of our company, and be able to get a glimpse behind the scenes of what makes us tick as people, and also on a more basic level, to be looked after. So we have a loyalty program, but it's not it's not like a point to win prizes so much, but you get looked after. Some people maybe give you a glass of champagne, or if we're trialing a new wine, we'll offer you a glass, or if we're doing a new dish on the menu, we'll comp you a dish on the menu, and then you get invited. When times are normal, we're going to do another of those great ski trips, which was absolutely fantastic. The one that we did.
Can you put my name on the list, please? Val d'Isère. I've got my skis, got my boots. We're ready to go. We are ready. Okay. I'm packed already, actually.
Okay, good. We'll let you know. We don't know when we'll ever be able to fly, or when we'll be able to fly yet. So, but when we do, I'll put you on the list.
Thank you. So D&D, actually, we were talking about awards earlier on. So I know that you did win an award for having the most sustainable restaurants. And I mean, everyone in the industry is very conscious of sustainability now. So what is it that sets you apart from the rest?
I wouldn't particularly say we're better than everybody else on sustainability. I think it's really important, and actually we did win that award for Sustainable Restaurant Group of the Year a few years ago, and we're actually in the middle of doing an audit now to see whether we are as good as we should be. At the moment, I don't really think. I think the world has changed. The level of expectation on sustainability, particularly post-COVID, actually. I think people have, during lockdown and so on, started to understand and realise how important the environment is. You know, in the time when, in the first lockdown, you could see, without so many cars around, the fact that the quality of life was better. There was less pollution.
Yeah.
People enjoyed going for walks. And I think there's an appreciation of the importance of the environment, which I think will be with us post coming out of lockdown. So at the moment, I mean, I think we're pretty good. Could we be better? I absolutely think so. What does that mean? We're on the stuff like energy consumption, reducing energy, which is, why would you not do that? Why would you not turn off your stoves and save yourself some money? Yeah. That's easy. We were pretty good on the plastic, cutting up plastic straws. We now need to have a look at plastic use in the kitchens. We are overall pretty good. I don't think good enough still on making sure that we know exactly where all our fish comes from. So to make sure that all our fish is being fished from sustainable, from waters which are not being overfished. And that's a very live, very live conversation, because, the chef wants to get the best fish, but it's the supply. Do we really know where it's coming from? And we need to be, we need to be on that. On meat, making sure that if you really wanted to be massively sustainable, you probably take meat off the menu. Now we're not at that. We have to get the balance between what people go to restaurants for, which is to have a good time, to eat, and we don't want to just foist our values on them. So we always have to have a balance. But we are very concerned and take care of whom we buy our meat from, where it comes from, and when it says it is something, that it is that, because sometimes people say all these things about blah blah blah, grass-fed, 36-day aged, so on, and it's not always that, because they haven't done their checking. So yeah, look, it's a constant. It's part of everyday how you run a restaurant business. I think generally restaurateurs are good at it compared with compared with supermarkets with a huge amount of food waste. We don't have a lot of food waste. Good chefs should not have food waste, because you can turn it into specials, you can feed your staff. Yeah. Yeah, look, I think it's an increasingly important part of how you do business. And I think it needs to be at the heart of how you do business, not just, let's just check our sustainability, tick, tick, tick. I think it needs to be at the heart of how you do business. So I don't think we're bad at it. I think we're pretty good, but I think I think we could be better.
Right. There's always room to be better. So Des, I'm very conscious of taking so much of your time. It's been amazing chatting with you today. I have one last question, and who knows where we'll end up with this one, but tell me something about yourself that I couldn't possibly know.
I don't think you would know or believe that we as restaurateurs were the first people to take British house music to Paris.
No, I didn't know that.
We did. The story behind that was that underneath Alcazar, we had a club called the Old Whiskey A Go-Go, which was very famous, which the Stones and even the Beatles and so on played in Paris. It was a bit of a dive. It was a smaller equivalent of the Marquee Club, which is now Mezzo. And we went down. It was most famous because Jim Morrison of the Doors, that's where he spent his last night before he topped himself the next day in Paris. We got this nightclub, and I had this idea that we should, because we're not in the nightclub business, we would do a deal with Fabric, with Keith and Cameron, who were running Fabric at the time. I said, listen, we'll give you half the club, but you need to introduce some really cool house music to Paris. Okay, so we did that, and we were absolutely rammed. Loads of. However, when we looked at cash tills at the end of the day, there was hardly any revenue, because house music, and this was in the late 1990s, early 2000s maybe. House music in London at that time was investment bankers and JP Morgan during the week, and at night they got the weekend, they got into their jeans and they went down to Fabric and spent loads of money. In house music, the music in Paris was different. They were all in the suburbs and they were taking lots of substances before they got to the club. All they would do was drinking water, so we had hardly any revenue. So I don't think you know anything about that. I have an even better story though. We had, okay, this is the last, I've got to go in a couple of minutes, but you like this one. We had, it was also to do with this club. And so having been massive failures of taking house music we had to come up with an idea for the club. And I had a meeting with David Guetta. I'm sure you know who David Guetta is.
Yes.
Yeah, so David Guetta, David and Kathy, his wife, ran a club called Bandouche, and he came to me and spent literally 2 hours in an office in London, where he was trying to persuade me that we should turn it into what seemed to me like an upmarket table dancing club. He was saying things like, oh no, it's not like that at all. You have all these lovely people, and then about 10 o'clock, all the girls take their clothes off. We can't do that, David. There's no way we could do that. And this is his concept, which he actually then opened. So I thought no more of it. We didn't do that, of course. About 5 or 6 years later, I'm walking along in Paris, and I said to Michel Beaumont, who's ran Alcazar, whatever happened to that complete time waster idiot, David Guetta? He said, oh, he's a world famous DJ now. He is the #1 DJ in the world, and he gets €1 million every time he plays in Ibiza. And I knew David Guetta, and as in the DJ, I said, don't tell me, Michelle, that David Guetta? Is that David Guetta?
Oh,
I
wow.
can't believe it. Because what he's done, he's grown his hair. He looked nothing like how I knew him when he was running Bandouche and putting this rather sleazy venture to us for our little club in Paris. But no, so I haven't seen him since. He's reinvented himself.
He has,
and become
and he's incredibly successful. And did you send him an email and say, hey, do you want to do that club? I'm all for it.
I think he's gone past that, darling. He's now massive. So we won't talk about it again.
Oh, that is a brilliant story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. It's been really enjoyable. I've enjoyed your stories thoroughly. But I'm in complete darkness now. Look, my curtains have closed.
I've talked all afternoon and into the night.
Brilliant. Absolutely love it. Thank you so much, Des.
Okay. Nice talking to you. All the best.
And you. Take care. Bye-bye.